At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFI without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's I Am Duck. Let's begin. The Vazali people's first space colony was not faring well. It had all begun when the Galactic Federation granted them a habitable moon as the next logical step in their species' development. What the Federation had not considered, however, was that the Vazali, widely regarded as the most peaceful species in the galaxy, were unable to defend themselves against space pirates, unscrupulous merchants, and even the occasional diplomat from other species who took advantage of their gentle nature during visits to the colony. Determined to solve these mounting problems, Vizix was now preparing to present his radical proposal to the Vazali Council, contacting their human neighbors and seeking shelter, even though the human colony was not a harmless settlement like their own, but the very death world beneath it. Vizix pushed his chair aside with his small legs, the furniture scraping softly against the floor as he stood to address the round table of the Vazali Council. His fluffy red ears turned rigid in a controlled display of confidence, a gesture that would have been entirely convincing if not for the way his paw unconsciously grabbed his own tail. A nervous habit he'd never quite managed to break. He took a deep breath, his large blue eyes and consequently his whiskers surveying the colorful faces arranged around the table. The council members waited in expectant silence, their fur patterns a kaleidoscope of colors that had no bearing on their genetics or family lines, simply another quirk of Vazali biology that other species found endlessly fascinating. Esteemed council members, Vizix finally spoke, his voice formal. I come before you today with a proposal that may seem radical, but which I believe offers our colony the best chance of survival. I suggest we contact the humans on the planet below and request permission to establish a presence on their world, a place of shelter we could retreat to whenever pirates attack our colony. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Lador, the oldest council member whose purple fur had begun showing streaks of silver, rose from his seat so quickly that his chair nearly toppled backward.
Have you completely lost your mind, Vizix? Are you truly suggesting that we voluntarily visit the death world below? The very planet we specifically requested the Federation keep us separated from?
Riley, the white-furred chief of security, clutched her whiskers in a gesture of profound distress, her voice rising to support Lador's objection. The Federation gave us this moon with explicit guarantees that the humans would maintain their distance, that they would respect our boundaries and never approach our territory. And now you're suggesting we go crawling to them for help? She paused, her pink nose twitching in a display of indignation. Need I remind you that these humans have a disturbing habit of referring to us using that word whenever they mention our species in Federation meetings? Lador nodded vigorously, his ears flattening against his head.
The C word, Vizix. They're incapable of taking us seriously. Every interaction, every diplomatic encounter, they can't help themselves. They call us cute. They ask to pet us. They make those cooing sounds. How can we possibly ask for help from a species that apparently doesn't even recognize us as sapient beings? They see us as pets, Vizix, pets!
Vizix opened his mouth to argue, his prepared counterpoints ready on his tongue, but the words died mid-sentence as the weight of their objections settled on him. They were right, weren't they? The humans' behavior at Federation gatherings was well documented. The constant requests to touch their fur, the badly suppressed squeals of delight whenever a Vazali diplomat entered a room, the endless stream of what humans called cute aggression that made serious diplomatic discourse nearly impossible. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Nyari, the youngest council member and the only one who had yet to speak, began to fidget with her yellow furred paws. As the ambassador to the Federation, she had encountered humans backstage on several occasions in the recent past. I actually met the human ambassador at the last Federation gathering, she admitted, her eyes fixed firmly on the table surface. Every head in the room swiveled toward her. He seemed genuinely sad about our decision to avoid humanity, especially considering how close our territories are. He said they'd been hoping for friendly neighbors, and we're disappointed that we wanted nothing to do with them. She paused, her tail curling around her chair leg. I let him pet me. For a while, actually. The shocked gasps that filled the room made her ears droop, but she pressed on, her voice gaining a fraction more confidence. It wasn't bad. In fact, it was quite enjoyable. The sensation was soothing, almost therapeutic. I believe Vizix's plan could work if we simply establish clear boundaries with the humans. They can only pet us when we give explicit permission. The human ambassador seemed very understanding when I explained this to him. I have high hopes that they would respect our wishes. Oh, humiliating! Lador sputtered, his purple fur standing on end. You're talking about the systematic humiliation of our entire species! Riley's white fur turned slightly pink with second-hand embarrassment. Nyari, how could you? You represent us to the entire Federation. Vizix finally found his voice again, seizing the opening Nyari had created. Nyari showed more bravery than any of us by actually engaging with the humans and learning about them firsthand. And she's right. We need to be practical here. Our species won't be able to maintain this moon colony unless we find somewhere safe to retreat when we're attacked. The raids are becoming more frequent, more bold. Last week, those Craxian merchants convinced our trade minister to sell them our entire medical supplies reserve for a handful of shiny rocks. The week before that, pirates made off with half our food processors while our security forces stood by, unable to do anything about it. He spread his paws on the table, leaning forward earnestly. I propose we visit the humans and negotiate the construction of an embassy on their world. Not just a building, but a genuine safe haven. Somewhere our people can flee when danger threatens. Yes, they'll have to deal with their enthusiasm for our appearance, but isn't that better than losing everything we've built here? Lador and Riley exchanged a long, meaningful look. Finally, Lador spoke, his tone feeling like an ultimatum. We'll agree to your proposal on one condition. You and Nyari must personally travel to the human death world to conduct these negotiations. If you're so confident this will work, if you truly believe the humans will treat us with respect and not as pets, then prove it. Go down there yourselves and establish this embassy you speak of. Riley nodded firmly. Yes, let's see if you dare to act on your beliefs when it means risking becoming pets on the human planet. If you return successfully, with dignity intact and agreements in place, then we'll consider broader cooperation. Vizix and Nyari exchanged a long look across the table. In Nyari's large eyes, he saw the same mixture of fear and determination that he felt churning in his own chest. They both understood what was being asked of them. To be the first Vizali to willingly set foot on the death world below, to trust their safety to a species known for keeping dangerous predators as companions and treating anything small and furry as irresistibly adorable. Finally, reluctantly, they both nodded their agreement to the terms. One day had passed since that fateful council meeting, and now Vizix and Nyari sat in the cramped cockpit of their tiny diplomatic vessel, awaiting permission to land after having contacted the humans about opening a formal diplomatic channel. The ship's recycled air tasted of anxiety and the faint metallic tang that always seemed to permeate small spacecraft. They might not even be interested in us anymore. Vizix muttered, his red-furred paws dancing nervously over the control panel, though the ship's AI was handling everything. We've ignored their communication attempts for 3 years. 3 years, Nayari. What if they've decided we're not worth the trouble? Nayari's yellow fur stilled as she shook her head, ever the optimist, despite the circumstances. The human ambassador seemed genuinely pleased when I spoke with him at the Federation gathering. I believe they'll forgive our previous distance when we explain our reasons. Humans are emotional creatures. They'll understand fear, even if they don't experience it at the same way we do. Emotional creatures who keep carnivorous predators in their homes for companionship, Vizix reminded her, his tail swishing anxiously. Who seek out extreme sports for entertainment and consider planets with hostile environments fun challenges, who look at us and immediately want to squeeze us because we're... Greetings, Vizali diplomatic vessel. A cheerful human voice crackled through their communication systems, making both of them jump. Thank you for your patience. You've been cleared for landing at Spaceport Alpha. Ambassador Richard Martin will meet you there shortly. Transmitting landing coordinates now. Welcome to New Haven. Vizix and Nayari exchanged another look. They'd been doing that a lot lately, these wordless communications born of shared apprehension. Without speaking, Vizix instructed the AI to take them to the human planet. His voice somehow steady as he gave the command. The descent through the atmosphere was smooth, but Vizix felt every meter of their drop toward the Death World's surface. His mind raced with all the dangers they might face. The gravity here was 1.5 times what the Fazali were evolved for. Not fatal, but certainly uncomfortable. Every movement would require more effort. Their hearts would have to work harder, and if they needed to run from something, But it was the planet's ecosystem that truly terrified him. Humanity had a well-documented habit of never eliminating the natural predators in their colonies, while other species would systematically remove dangerous fauna before establishing settlements. Humans simply adapted themselves to the local environment. They built their homes with reinforced materials, established protocols for wildlife encounters, and taught their children from infancy how to coexist with creatures that could easily kill them. The colonial reports he'd read mentioned everything from venomous anthropods to large carnivorous mammals, all living in relatively close proximity to human settlements. Touching down in 30 seconds, the AI announced in its neutral tone, completely unaware of the panic it was inducing in its passengers. The ship settled onto the landing pad, causing barely a tremor, and Nayari reluctantly reached for the artificial gravity controls. "We need to test if we can function in their gravity, before we leave the ship," she said, though her paw hesitated over the switch. "Together," Vizix suggested, moving his paw to join hers. They deactivated the artificial gravity simultaneously. The change was immediate and uncomfortable. Vizix felt his entire body grow heavier, as if invisible hands were pressing down on him from above. His legs trembled slightly as they adjusted to supporting the additional weight, and he could feel his heart rate increasing to compensate for the additional strain. But it was manageable. Uncomfortable, yes. Exhausting, if maintained for extended periods, certainly, but not the crushing, immobilizing force he'd feared. "It's not too bad," Nayari said, though her voice hinted at a slight strain. She took a few experimental steps, her movement sluggish but functional. "We can do this." A soft chime indicated an incoming message. "The human ambassador is waiting for you outside," the AI informed them. "He has requested that you take your time and not feel rushed." "That's considerate," Vizix admitted, surprised by the thoughtfulness. He'd half expected the human to be impatiently pounding on their hull by now. They made their way to the ship's ramp control, each step requiring conscious effort in the higher gravity. Vizix's paw hesitated over the button. Once they stepped outside, they would be completely vulnerable. Small, fluffy prey animals on a world full of predators, both natural and civilized. "Together?" Nayari asked again, and Vizix appreciated her solidarity. The ramp descended with a soft hiss, and alien air flooded into their ship. thicker than they were used to, carrying unfamiliar scents of vegetation and something vaguely metallic. As they descended, Vizix found himself genuinely surprised by the human architecture spreading out before them. He'd expected either sterile, utilitarian structures or ostentatious displays of power. Instead, the buildings were sturdy and practical, but not without beauty. Clean lines softened by decorative elements, functional designs that still managed to be pleasing to the eye. Gardens and green spaces were integrated throughout the spaceport, as if the humans couldn't bear to be completely separated from nature, even in their most technological environments. His gaze traveled upward to the moon hanging in the afternoon sky. Their moon, the new world they'd been given but were struggling to maintain. From here it looked peaceful, serene even. No one would guess the troubles plaguing the colony just by looking at that pale orb. "Hello, welcome to New Haven." The voice drew Vizix's attention to the human standing at the base of their ramp. Ambassador Richard Martin was tall by Fazali standards, nearly 3 times their height, with the dark hair and warm brown skin common to many humans, but it was his smile that made Vizix take an involuntary step backward. The human was showing so many teeth that for one primal moment, Vizix's instinct screamed that this predator was about to devour them. Nayari, who had actually interacted with Richard before, showed more courage. She approached carefully, her movements made more tentative by both the gravity and natural caution. At barely half the human's height, she had to crane her neck back to look at his face. Then, in a gesture that made Vizix's fur stand on end, she deliberately lowered her head in what appeared to be submission. Richard's hand descended slowly, carefully, and came to rest on Nayari's head between her ears. His fingers moved in gentle strokes, and Vizix watched in amazement as Nayari's tail began to sway in obvious enjoyment. A soft purr emanated from her chest. "I almost didn't believe it when traffic control told me you were requesting permission to visit," Richard said, his voice warm with genuine pleasure, even as he continued the gentle petting motion. "After 3 years of radio silence, I'd begun to think we'd done something to offend your species before we'd even properly met." Nayari's eyes had drifted half-closed under the human's ministrations, but she managed to respond coherently. "Oh, I must apologize for our species' previous avoidance, Ambassador. We're actually here because we need help. Vizix has a proposal for establishing an embassy on your world, a place where our people could seek shelter when our colony is attacked." Richard's hand stilled, and his expression shifted from pleasure to concern. "Attacked? There's a war happening on your moon? How do we not know about this? We monitor local space traffic constantly. We would have detected fleet movements. Weapons fire." Vizix finally found the courage to approach, though he maintained what he hoped was a respectful distance. "Not a war, Ambassador Martin. I'm Vizix, Colonial Planning Coordinator. The attacks aren't military in nature. They're opportunistic. Pirates, unscrupulous merchants, even supposed allies who take advantage of our nature." "I'm not sure I understand," Richard said, his hand resuming its gentle motion on Nayari's head, as if the petting was as soothing to him as it clearly was to her. "The Federation granted you the moon specifically because this region is considered peaceful. The shipping lanes are well patrolled." Vizix's tail softened in embarrassment. "Our species evolved on a planet with no natural predators, Ambassador. We never developed, aggressive instincts. When someone threatens us, our first response is to negotiate, to offer compromise. When merchants claim their goods are worth 10 times their actual value, we usually believe them. When pirates board our stations and demand tribute, we give it to them rather than risk confrontation." "But surely your security forces," Richard began. "Last week," Nayari interrupted, her voice slightly dreamy with the continued petting, "a single Craxian merchant convinced our trade minister to exchange our entire reserve of medical supplies for a bag of colorful rocks he claimed were priceless gems from the core worlds. They were glass, Ambassador. Colored glass. 2 weeks before that, Vizix added, a small pirate crew, no more than 6 individuals, walked into our main supply depot and took half our food processes. Our security forces were present, but when the pirates growled at them, they immediately backed down and ran away. Richard's expression had shifted through several emotions during their explanation. Disbelief, understanding, and finally something that looked like protective anger. They're taking advantage of your peaceful nature. That's absolutely unacceptable. Would you like a tour while we discuss your embassy proposal? Richard offered, finally removing his hand from Nayari's head, though Vizix noticed the human's fingers moving as if wanting to resume the contact. I can show you around New Haven, give you a better sense of what we could offer. That would be wonderful, Nayari agreed, her professional composure returning now that the petting had stopped, though Vizix noticed her ears drooping slightly in what might have been disappointment. Richard led them to a ground vehicle, a robust enclosed transport with seats that, while too large for the Fazali, had apparently been modified with cushions and step tools in preparation for their visit. The thoughtfulness of the gesture wasn't lost on Vizix. As they traveled through the colony, Richard provided running commentary on the sights. The farmlands they passed were impressive, vast fields of earth crops adapted to local soil, interspersed with native plants that humans had learned to cultivate. The integration seemed seamless, as if the humans had found a way to convince the planet itself to accept their presence rather than forcing their will upon it. Your agricultural practices are quite advanced, Vizix observed, his analytical mind appreciating the sight of the operation. The yield density must be impressive. We've had good success with vertical farming in the controlled environments, Richard explained, pointing to a series of tall structures in the distance. But we also work with the local ecosystem where possible. The native pollinators are actually more efficient than earth bees for most of our crops, once you figure out how to attract them. As they continued the tour, Vizix found himself gradually relaxing. The humans seemed genuinely interested in their well-being, not just in the opportunity to interact with what he probably saw as adorable aliens. Finally, he gathered the courage to address the primary concern. Ambassador, he began carefully, one of our main worries about establishing closer ties with humanity is the tendency of your species to treat us as pets rather than equals. The constant request to touch our fur, the use of what we've come to call the C word, the infantilizing behavior. If our people were to visit in larger numbers, would this be a significant problem? Richard had the grace to look embarrassed, his cheeks darkening slightly. I won't lie to you, Vizix. You're absolutely right about our instinctive response to your appearance. To human eyes, the Fazali trigger every protective, nurturing instinct we have. You're small, fluffy, with large eyes and expressive ears. Basically, everything our brains are hardwired to find cute and want to protect. That's what we feared, Vizix said, his ears drooping. However, Richard continued, adult humans are capable of controlling their impulses when they understand the importance of doing so. We can establish clear protocols, no touching without explicit permission, no infantilizing language in formal settings, treating you with the full respect you deserve as sapient beings and equals. What about human children? Nayari asked. They might not understand such boundaries. Richard nodded thoughtfully. That would be more challenging. Children under a certain age might not fully grasp the concept, but we could establish designated areas where interaction is limited to adults who have been briefed on proper protocols, at least initially. As our specialists become more familiar with each other, we can gradually expand access as understanding grows. That sounds reasonable, Vizix admitted. He took a breath, preparing to make his main proposal. What we're primarily seeking is the establishment of an embassy in your world. A place our people could evacuate to when our colony is threatened. A sanctuary no, Richard said firmly, and Vizix felt his heart sink. But the human continued before despair could fully set in. An embassy is thinking too small. If your people are being victimized by pirates and unscrupulous merchants, hiding isn't the solution. You need defense capabilities, medical support for those who are hurt, and active protection. The vehicle had stopped, and Richard turned to face them fully. What if, instead of just offering shelter, we provided assistance to secure your colony? We could send builders to help construct proper defensive installations. Nothing aggressive, but enough to make pirates think twice. Medical teams to help treat injuries and establish proper healthcare infrastructure. And he paused, as if considering whether to make the offer. We could arrange for a gunship patrol to monitor your space and respond to any distress calls. Vizix and Ayari exchanged yet another look, but this one was filled with amazement rather than apprehension. You would do that? Vizix asked. But what would you want in return? What resources would you require from us? Richard smiled, and this time Vizix didn't see a predator's threat display but genuine warmth. Honestly, it would cost us relatively little to help. We have the resources, the personnel, and frankly, our colonists would jump at the chance to help protect your people. Do you have any idea how depressed our colony has been, thinking that our fuzzy neighbors want nothing to do with us? Depressed? Nayari asked, tilting her head in confusion. We'd thought we'd done something wrong, Richard explained. When your species requested a moon that kept you separated from us, there was genuine concern that humanity's reputation had somehow preceded us in the worst way. There were town memes about it. Some people suggested sending apology gifts even though we didn't know what we'd be apologizing for. He laughed, the sound self-deprecating rather than mocking. If we could tell the colony that not only are the Fazali willing to open communications, but that we get to help protect you, that we get to be the good guys who help our neighbors, the governor might actually cry with relief. Again. Again? Vizix asked. He cried the first time, when your species requested no contact. He's very emotional about community building. Nayari's tail was swishing with increasing excitement. Vizix, we should accept. This is far more than we'd hoped for. Vizix found himself nodding slowly. The offer was generous, almost suspiciously so. I need to understand, Ambassador. Why would you expend so many resources for no gain? Richard's expression grew more serious. Because it's the right thing to do. Because being good neighbors isn't about profit. It's about community. And he hesitated, then continued with obvious embarrassment. Because the thought of anyone hurting beings as peaceful and trusting as the Fazali genuinely upsets most humans on a visceral level. We're protective of things we consider cute, yeah? But that protectiveness isn't shallow. It comes from a deep place of our psychology. The same instincts that make us want to pet you also make us want to ensure you're safe, happy, and thriving. Even if we maintain boundaries about physical contact, Vizix pressed. Especially if you maintain boundaries, Richard assured him. Knowing that you trust us enough to set boundaries and expect them to be respected, that's not a limitation. That's the foundation of a real relationship between equals. 3 weeks had passed since that first momentous meeting, and the 4 members of the Fazali Council sat around their familiar round table, watching recorded footage on the flat screen mounted above it. The display showed various scenes from their colony streets, where the first groups of human visitors were interacting with Fazali citizens.
I can't believe it,
Lador muttered, his purple fur rippling in surprise.
They're actually restraining themselves. Oh, that human there, see how his hand moved toward that younger's head? Oh, but he pulled back and simply nodded respectfully instead.
The footage showed a human engineer explaining defensive shield generators to a group of fascinated Fazali technicians. The human's hands gestured animatedly as he spoke, but he never once reached towards his fuzzy audience, despite what must have been overwhelming temptation.
They're even avoiding the C word,
Lador continued, his tone carrying a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect.
That tall one there just called young Millix remarkably intelligent instead of, well, what they usually say. Oh, this arrangement is actually working somehow.
Riley, however, was focused on different footage on her personal tablet. Her white fur bristled with concern as she projected her screen onto the main display. Look at this, though. This was recorded yesterday in the Market District. The footage showed several Fazali citizens actively approaching humans, lowering their heads in clear invitation. The humans, after checking for consent, were providing gentle pets and ear scratches, leading to purring Fazali with swaying tails. A small crowd had gathered, and some youngsters were actually queuing for their turn. Despite all cases clearly involving consent, Riley said, her tone worried. I'm concerned about what this means for our cultural development. If it becomes not just acceptable but commonplace to be the constant subjects of human affection, how will that change who we are as a species? While our children grow up seeing themselves as pets to be coddled rather than independent beings. Nayari's yellow fur fluffed slightly in indignation.
That's a rather extreme interpretation, Riley. Physical affection between species isn't automatically demeaning.
Many species engage in social grooming or other forms of contact. The fact that humans express care through petting isn't inherently different from how the Altarians share scent marks or how the Vendoni braid each other's tentacles. She paused, then added with a slight smile.
Besides, being petted on the head can be quite enjoyable for those who approach it with an open mind. Vizix experienced it himself during our negotiations and didn't find it demeaning at all. Did you, Vizix?
All eyes turned to Vizix, whose red fur darkened slightly with embarrassment. He'd hoped that particular detail wouldn't come up in council discussions.
Val,
he started, his tail curling around his chair leg. It happened during our second meeting with Ambassador Martin. We were reviewing the defense specifications, and I just solved a complex problem with his shield geometry calculations. Richard was so pleased that he reached out automatically, then caught himself and started to pull back. I could see how much effort it was taking for him to resist, and I thought, well, if we're asking them to help us, perhaps some reciprocal gesture was appropriate.
And?
Lador prompted. His purple ears perked with interest despite his earlier objections. Vizix sighed. It was pleasant. Very pleasant, actually. The physical sensation is soothing, yes, but it was more than that. When he petted my head, it was clearly meant as praise, as recognition of my contribution. It wasn't demeaning, it was affirming. He was genuinely delighted by my intelligence, and the petting was his way of expressing that joy. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I've experienced it several more times since then. With different humans, construction workers who were impressed with our architectural designs, medical staff who appreciated our biological information, the gunship patrol captain who was amazed by our navigational mathematics. Each time the petting came with genuine respect for our abilities, not despite them. But there's a danger here, Vizix continued, his tone growing more serious. The humans' response to us, their urge to protect, provide for, and yes, pet us, it gives us unprecedented leverage in our dealings with them. I've watched our trade negotiators unconsciously tilt their heads in appealing ways during discussions, seen our youngsters learn that looking particularly small and vulnerable leads to extra treats or assistance. We're receiving remarkably favorable terms in every agreement, far better than standard Federation rates. He looked at each council member in turn. The humans are vulnerable to our appearance in ways they can't fully control, even when they're aware of it. They know we're sapient beings, they're equals in every meaningful way, yet their protective instincts towards us override logical decision-making. Our human merchant yesterday accepted a trade deal that barely broke even for him, simply because our negotiator's ears drooped sadly when he initially declined. Then we're taking advantage of them, Riley said, though she sounded more thoughtful than accusatory. We could be, Vizix agreed. That's my point. It's our species that now bears the moral duty of not exploiting this trust being established. We must be scrupulously fair in our dealings, never ask for more than is reasonable, and never manipulate their protective instincts for unfair gain. The humans are choosing to be vulnerable to us, choosing to help us despite knowing we affect them this way. The least they can do is honor that trust with integrity. They sent builders who are constructing defensive systems that will keep pirates at bay, Nayari added. Medical teams who have already treated dozens of injuries from the last raid, and that gunship patrol. They intercepted a Craxian merchant vessel yesterday that was approaching with counterfeit goods to trade. The merchants turned around without even attempting to dock. All because we asked for shelter, Laydor mused, his earlier hostility completely absent now. We asked for the minimum, a place to hide, and they responded with comprehensive protection and support. It challenges our assumptions about predator species, Vizek said. Yes, humans are apex predators on their world, but that predator nature includes protecting things they care about. And apparently, we've been adopted into that category of things worth protecting. Whether we intended it or not, Riley added, though her tone had softened considerably. The council sat in contemplative silence for a moment, watching the footage continue to play. Humans and Fazali working together on construction projects, sharing meals with careful attention to different dietary needs, youngsters from both species playing together under watchful adult supervision. Finally, Vizek spoke again. We have a responsibility here, not just to our own people, but to the relationship we're building with humanity. We must ensure that our people understand that accepting human affection is a choice, not an obligation, that maintaining boundaries is healthy and expected, but also that there's no shame in enjoying the connection, if that's what individuals choose. And we must be worthy of their trust, Nayari added firmly. They're treating us as cute, yes, but also as neighbors worthy of protection and respect. We must show them that their faith in us is justified. In the years that followed, the partnership between the Vizali and the humans of New Haven would become a landmark case in interspecies cooperation, studied in xenosociology courses across the Federation. What began as desperate neighbors seeking shelter evolved into something far more profound. A relationship built on mutual understanding and complementary strengths, where the Vizali brought mathematics, philosophy, and an perspective unclouded by aggression. The humans provided protection, engineering, and a fierce loyalty to those they considered friends. The sight of human gunships escorting Fazali merchant vessels became commonplace in that system, while Fazali mathematicians solved complex problems that had stymied human scientists for years. But perhaps most remarkably, their relationship proved that species could acknowledge and work with their instinctive responses to one another without letting those instincts define the relationship. Yes, humans found the Fazali irresistibly cute. Yes, many Fazali discovered they enjoyed human affection, but these facts became merely one aspect of a rich, complex partnership between equals. The New Haven Accords, as they came to be known, established the framework for consent-based interspecies physical affection that would be adopted throughout the Federation. The simple principle that one species finding another adorable did not grant license to treat them as less than equal seems obvious in retrospect, but it took the Fazali gentle wisdom and humanity's protective instincts to prove it could work in practice. In the end, both species gained something invaluable. The Fazali received the warrior spirits they lacked, manifested not in themselves but in steadfast protectors who would face any threat on their behalf. And the humans, they gained something equally precious, another species of fluffy beings who trusted them enough to set boundaries, expected them to be better than their instincts, and occasionally, when the mood struck and consent was given, would lower their heads for the gentle affection that brought both species such unexpected joy.